Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome, everybody, to Nightlight. Thanks so much for sharing your time with us. We greatly appreciate that. We know how precious time is, and for you to share it with us, we are so honored. I want to thank first Ken Quiethawk for his amazing intro. As always, you can find him at his website, nativestorytellers.com. He and his wife are native storytellers, and they show us an alternative way of preserving history, cosmology, and legends in a far more enjoyable way of relating them, and I think in many ways much preferable to the school books that our children are reading today. But that's for another show. Tonight we have forensic geologist Scott Wolter, who is the host of the Travel Channel's hit show American Unearthed, which follows him on his quest to uncover the truth behind historic artifacts and sites found throughout North America. Scott is also the author of several books, including The Kensington Rune Stone, Compelling New Evidence, The Hooked X, Key to the Secret History of North America, Akhenaten to the Founding Fathers, The Mystery of the Hooked X, and The Cryptic Code of the Templars in America, Origins of the Hooked X Symbol. I read all the books, and I have found them all fascinating, and I highly recommend them. Scott has been president of American Petro Services Incorporated since 1990 and has been the principal petrographer in more than 7,000 investigations throughout the world, including the evaluation of fire-damaged concrete at the Pentagon following the attacks of September 11, 2001. Tonight we're going on an amazing journey with Scott throughout his newest book, Cryptic Code of the Templars in America. This is his third in the Hooked X series, and it explores new scientific findings and recently discovered documents that show a vastly different story of North American history than the current narrative. The revelations in the Cryptic Code are sure to generate new discussion around the medieval Knights Templar, their job and their role, in the European exploration of North America, and of the origins of the Hooked X. In Scott's continued pursuit to understand and authenticate the Kensington Rune Stone found in Minnesota in 1898, and the important role of the Knights Templar had within history, he uncovers the layers of cryptic code that authenticate the Rune Stone once and for all, and unveils connections at one time thought unbelievable, and now have become thought-provoking and much, much more. I guess it just goes to prove that carved-in stone has many different levels of understanding, and it takes new perspective to unveil all of them. So, welcome to the show, Scott. I'm so glad you're here.
Well, that was quite an introduction, Barbara. Thank you very much.
I'm breathless. I have read all your books.
I could tell. That was a mouthful, but you did a great job. And, it's funny to hear somebody else describe this work. It's like, I wonder who that is you're talking about. But really, it was very, very good. And I don't know. It's been an incredible journey, and it continues, and I'm enjoying the ride. That I can tell you for sure.
Well, I can tell you something that carved in stone doesn't necessarily mean that there's not more definitions and layers to be found within what is carved in stone. I mean, you're talking about the Kensington Rune Stone. So, but I have to tell you something that I noticed after reading all your books, and I know that you have become a Knight Templar. A Mason, and possibly a Knight Templar to boot. But I've noticed that because of the background that you've gotten from Freemasonry, it gives you a deeper perspective into a lot of the things that you're looking into. And, I have to tell you, it makes your books even more fascinating than they were before.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, and there's no question about it that becoming a Mason, and I am a Masonic Knights Templar. I've gone through all of the York Rite degrees, which are amazing. And, when I look back on this now with, it's 20 years of hindsight now. It'll be 20 years in July. It's been an incredible journey, and I think if I had to do it all over again, I have to be honest and say I don't think I would change anything, because when I first started with the Kensington Rune Stone, I never heard of it before. I didn't know what they were talking about. I had no knowledge of it, and therefore no bias either way. I couldn't, because I'd never heard of it. And that really was the best way to start. And where it started was with the rock itself. And being a forensic geologist, I've worked with rocks all my life, and concrete as well, which is essentially a man-made rock. And the one thing I've learned about rocks is rocks don't lie. Rocks don't care. Rocks just are. And I trust the rocks. I don't trust some people. Yeah. And I when you stop and think about it from that perspective, the rock told me early on that it was authentic. And from there on, I used that as my foundation. And it spoke loud and clear. And that's what led me down all these other roads. And it has served me well, let's put it that way.
Well, I think the fact that not being swayed easily by public thought or what other people are saying, but going for just the fact. It sounds like Dragnet, just the facts, just the facts, just the facts.
Right, right.
But it really makes a difference in looking at especially historical artifacts like you do. It's sort of like, this could be this could be that, but what and how much can I prove, and where can I attach it to documented, authentic statements about it? And it makes your work so much more genuine. A lot harder work, but so much more genuine.
Well, the process of gathering facts first is called scientific method, and the scientific method, the whole process of investigation, doesn't matter what the subject matter is. It doesn't matter what the topic is. It doesn't matter if it's a murder case or if you're investigating a rock. The process of investigation is always facts first. And, if you're able to get enough facts, because in some cases it's very difficult, but the runestone, there was all kinds of facts, again, starting with the rock. But what you do is you follow the facts where they take you. And it's a simple process. And if you get enough facts, then the next step is interpreting those facts and trying to make sense and understand, what are they telling you? What are they telling us? And finally, if and when you have enough facts and evidence and interpretations that are all pointing in the same direction, that are consistent, then you're in a position where you might be able to draw a conclusion. And again, this is what I've done for almost 35 years, all day, every day. That's all I do. And so I'm actually pretty good at it. And in this case, I will tell you that the Kensington Rune Stone was one of the easiest evidence trails I've ever followed. it went in one direction, beeline straight to it. So, and quite frankly, in some ways, I'm surprised that others weren't able to follow it the same way, but the mistakes that they made had to do with the process of investigation and the facts that they collected. And they let the human element creep into their investigations more than it should, and that's where they lost their way.
Well, in a lot of ways, too, we as a society are very fortunate in that a lot of the technical stuff that has been developed lately within the last decade or so enables you to get even further into authenticating things that in the 1800s just wasn't possible.
Right.
And the poor farmer that dug this poor thing up, I mean, he went through decades of being called a forger and a fraud and everything else.
And his family suffered because of it. You know, Olaf and Karen had 9 children, and 2 of them committed suicide. And even the family, which we've talked about this, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, some are still living that knew all these people, agree that at least in part, certainly Amanda Oman took her life in part due to the harassment of academics and doubters and skeptics and critics and people that attacked them for their father creating this fake. And it should never have happened. And it's really a tragic story in many ways. And I'd be lying if I said that part of my motivation is not to make sure that the truth is known. And, you know, you can't go back and fix things that have already happened. But, you know, I think the family appreciates the fact that the truth is coming out, because I'll never forget the first time I met Darwin Oman. And, you know, I said I would like to look at some of the artifacts and documents that your family has. And they had a lot of stuff. They had just never gone through it because all that material was packed in 5 plastic tubs. And I remember asking him, I said, why did you guys never take a look at this stuff after we had gone through it and found really just some amazing letters and evidence? And he said to me, you know what, Scott? He said there were many times we thought about going through it, and we just thought about all the things that had happened, and we just said, we'll look at it next year. And they just never got around to it. And it was because there were just too many painful memories in those boxes.
Now, was this the first place that you had seen the hooked X, or had you seen it before?
No, I didn't. Heck, I didn't know what the hooked X was when I first saw the Rune Stone. In fact, I knew nothing about runes or dialect or grammar or any of that. And it was because of two people that I worked with that were the world's experts at the time, Professor Henrik Williams and Dr. Richard Nielsen. They knew more about medieval Scandinavian runes than anyone in the world. Dick passed away a couple of years ago, but Professor Williams is still in Sweden. But they taught me about the runes, the dialect, the grammar, the dating. And, you know, I don't consider myself a runologist, but I know enough to be extremely dangerous. And, you know, one of the mysteries that was always hanging out there that nobody could figure out was what was this mysterious X-shaped symbol that was being used for the A sound within the inscription. And they knew, you know, what the you know, the word, the letter was supposed to be, because in the word it's the only thing it could be. And they had just never seen this symbol. And I remember when we would talk about it, we didn't really know what to call it. So one day I just came up with, well, let's just call it the hooked X. It's got that little hook on the upper right arm. Let's call it the hooked X, then we know what we're talking about. And it caught on. So, no, I didn't know what it was then, but I think I do now.
Well, it certainly has led you on an amazing journey through, I mean, all over the world, actually.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I, you know, to be honest with you, I've always been fascinated with how you have taken that one piece of that one item and followed it all over the world, trying to figure out what it is, and you finally did, which I think is fascinating.
Well, you know, I'm pretty tenacious and stubborn, and the one thing that is also part of doing forensics, right, is once the stone told me that it was authentic, and I understood where it was found and a little bit of the background story. Once I knew it was authentic, then I also knew that these things also had to be true. Somebody carved it. They came from some place for some reason. Those things absolutely are true, and there has to be an answer to those questions, because if it's authentic, that's just the way logic works. So I knew that if I followed the evidence trail, I felt confident that I would figure it out, because there's always an answer to these things, and I'm pretty dog determined when I want to do something, and if I want something bad enough, I'll work my fanny off to find it. But logic was the driving force, and it happened. So I feel really good about that. What I don't feel good about is, a lot of these skeptics and especially the academics. I mean, the people that don't know what they're talking about, that are alive on the internet and criticize, they don't matter to me, because, I don't mind if somebody wants to ask me tough questions, or if they disagree with something that I've done. I'm happy to talk about it. In fact, if I made a mistake, please point it out to me. I'll fix it. And I'm not afraid to admit that I made a mistake, because I'm human, and if we have made a mistake, we'll do everything we can to correct it. But, in most cases, the people that criticize me, it's not a matter of something that I did wrong or is missing. They just don't like the results. Well, tough hop, baby. You know what? Life is tough sometimes, and you know what? If you're wrong, you're wrong, and they're just flat out wrong in this case. But they're not the ones that matter. The ones that I have a problem with are the academics, and it's really irresponsible of them to continue to maintain this position when at this point in time they have no evidence to support their position. And if you think about it, how could they? Because if the Kensington Rune Stone is indeed authentic, which it is, and we have all this evidence in multiple disciplines to support its authenticity, then how can there be factual evidence to support the contrary? But it can't exist, right?
Right, and they can't put it on your plate and serve it up to you either. I think
that's right.
One of the most, for me, everybody has things they look for in work like yours, and I think the thing that among others, but the one that really most impressed me about the authenticity of your work is that there were a couple of places, at least one that I remember, where you said I was wrong. And, when somebody can absolutely say, I was wrong, I got it wrong, and here's the new direction I'm going in, that to me has greater validity than anything else. I mean, to be able to say to people, hey, I got this wrong, but this is the way I think it goes now, is so much more important than standing your ground and insisting you're right when you know you're wrong.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Barbara. That's absolutely true. And make no mistake, I don't like being wrong. I mean, nobody likes to be wrong, right? But
right.
It's not personal, and we're all human. We all make mistakes. Now, what I have found is when I've made mistakes, that's when I learn the most, or maybe even learn the best, because, you don't want to repeat a mistake. And if you do make a mistake and you're corrected, whether somebody points it out to me or I figure it out on my own, what's important is, first of all, I'll never forget, because, oh, God, I screwed that one up. I'm not going to screw that up again. And that's part of the process. And, science is that way. I mean, no important revelation or new discovery didn't come without plenty of failures during the trial and error process. Nobody gets it right and does something amazing the first time, or rarely does that happen. You make mistakes and you learn as you go, and that's just part of the process. And that's just the way it's done. I don't have any personal investment in it. It's the way it's done. It's the way it should be done.
Absolutely. And So what is the final, at this point, decision on what the Kensington Rune Stone actually is?
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, the Rune Stone has told them all along what it was. And first and foremost, it's a land claim. I mean, the first three lines say 8 Goths and 22 Northmen on this acquisition business or taking up land from Vinland far to the west. How much more clear can it be? It's a land claim first and foremost, and you know that was an important point because you know at that point I started looking into land claims and how was this done and what were the traditions of various countries and various orders and various groups of people and there's a lot of different ways that people did it, but in the 14th century, one of the ways they did it was by placing a land claim stone, a carved stone, and a tin plate plaque in a tree for redundancy, so that you could, in case one or something happened to the tin plaque, you've got redundancy. But they would put these things at the headwaters of river systems, and thereby they could then claim the entire river system and all the land associated with it. And I find it kind of crazy in a way that prior to our myself getting involved, nobody had ever looked at where the rune stone was found geographically. In fact, I heard so many people say, well, why would they place this stone in the middle of nowhere? Well, it's not in the middle of nowhere. It's on the north-south continental divide of North America, and it serves as the watershed divide for the Mississippi and Missouri watersheds all the way to the Gulf and the Red River Hudson Bay watershed to the north. So theoretically, they could have laid claim to half the continent of North America just with the river systems alone. And I'm kind of surprised we're the first ones to point that out.
Well, and this was basically the Louisiana Purchase.
Exactly. It's bigger than the Louisiana Purchase, but yes, in essence, it does include all the land of the Louisiana Purchase, and more.
Well, what prevented one country from digging up somebody else's land claim, pounding it into gravel, and placing their own there?
Nothing. Nothing prevented them from doing it. The problem is you have to find it. And that brings up a really good point about how would they have found their runestone again, because I believe that it was buried shallowly in the ground. And from that perspective, how the heck are you going to find this thing? Well, what we have proposed, and actually I think we proved, was that there's a very interesting and curious cluster of glacial boulders on the Oman farm where the runestone was found. Actually, over a dozen, I think it's about 15 of them now, of these rounded triangular stone holes that can only be cut with a straight chisel and a hammer. And they vary in depth anywhere from, say, an inch up to, I think some of the deepest ones I've seen get up to 7-8 inches deep. And they're permanent features in the rock. They're rounded triangles, and the only way you can do that is with a straight hammer and chisel. And they happen to triangulate at the Oman farm, and creating 3 lines, an X and then a horizontal line when you look on a north-south map, that all intersect exactly where the runestone was found. And actually, these stone holes, as I like to call them, for years, actually for over 100 years, they called them mooring stone holes because they are essentially the same as the mooring stone holes that they have over in Scandinavian countries, where they would, put a steel pin in the bedrock and then tie their ships up, right? Well, yeah. The problem with that is we're talking about, the center of the continent. I mean, there's some marshes around there and little puddle lakes, but the fact is they did not sail their way to Kensington. They walked, right? They sailed into the Great Lakes, but they walked from there to what is now Kensington. And the problem with calling them mooring stone holes is that automatically implies an interpretation that in this case is wrong. If you call them stone holes, nobody can criticize you because you're just describing what they are. They're holes in stones, stone holes.
Mm-hmm. So you get into such amazingly different material in this book than you have in the other books. So I'm fascinated at how you have connected all of them. Delighted, but fascinated as well.
Let me ask you a question, Barbara. I'm curious because I haven't really talked to that many people yet that have finished the book and digested it. But let me ask you, what was it that you found the most compelling parts in the book? Or if you had to pick a chapter or a subject matter, what did you find the most fascinating? I know this is your interview, but I'm curious.
Well, I was very interested with how you tied the Cremora document into all of your material. So, see, I'm fortunate in that I have lots of time on my hands, and I've read Bill Mann's stuff. I read Zena Halpern's book. I read the because you recommended it, the Jesus Family Tomb book too. So. I, seeing the connection of all of this material, and because I've read a lot of it, so that I saw the connections. I think the most impressive thing for me was how you got into the cryptic code, connecting it to all of the Masonry material, and therefore connecting it to the Templar material, and thereby getting us back into Jerusalem, which was fascinating.
Yep.
And
well, that's interesting that you talk about these other books and how they're different subject matter, but yet they all interconnect in this story. And you're 100% right. And it's been a long journey to sort of put it all together. And a lot of people sort of look at them as standalone things, and they are standalone things, but how they interconnect and how the threads fit together, and there are so many different pieces of information, and it's like this giant matrix of evidence that how do you fit it all together? Well, when you look at a historical story like this, it's not necessarily a linear story because there are tangents that go in different directions, but yet they all seem to come back together and weave together if and only if you're on the right track. And that's where this story, for me, is tracking so well because everything does fit. And that's when you know you're on the right track, because if you have a piece of data or, something that's hanging out there that doesn't fit the thread, you're not there yet. And I'm not saying that we've got everything figured out yet. But what I will say is I think that we do have the basic overall story that actually, well, it goes back thousands of years, but really the journey of the hooked X, going back to the Jesus ossuary. I mean, I have to tell you, Barbara, when Charlie Pellegrino, who was one of the Telpiat tomb researchers, he was the scientist that went into the tomb and did a lot of the scientific work there actually in the tomb. But he also took photographs of the ossuaries that were taken out. And when he sent me that email, and I was, he was introduced to me, or we were introduced to each other through a mutual friend who happens to live here in Minnesota, Jerry Lutkin, and he said, can Charlie send you an email? He wants to show you some pictures. I said, absolutely. So he sent me these pictures, and when I opened them up, and I saw that hooked X tau cross on the lid of the Jesus ossuary, Barbara, I can't tell you. I can't even remember how I felt. I was literally blown away, but I also had sort of this rush of adrenaline of, I don't know if the word is satisfaction or just, I felt so good. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe this is here. There it is. It's unmistakable. And I wrote back and I told these guys, I said, guys, that's not a star symbol. That's a monogram of two symbols, because the tau cross is slightly below. And then I explained my reasoning, and the whole hooked X tau cross theory that I have.
can do that.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I lost you.
Yes, I know. I could hear you there. I could hear you, but you couldn't hear me.
Nope, you went off into the ether. So we're talking about.
Are we good now?
Yeah, we're good now.
Okay. Should we just pick up again? Are you live again?
Oh, I can edit out my musings of where the heck did he go.
Okay. Well, I know where I was.
Off.
I can just finish it, and then we can move on if you want.
Sure.
Okay.
You
well, anyway, pardon me?
You were talking about Pellegrino.
Oh, yeah, Charlie Pellegrino, the scientist on the Telpia tomb, and he sent me the photographs that he had taken that up to that point had never been published of the lid of the Jesus ossuary. Now, on the side of the box was the name Jesus, son of Joseph, which many people have interpreted to be the biblical Jesus and his mortal remains, and quite frankly, I'm convinced they absolutely are. And I will tell you a different story here real quick after I finish this point. But on the lid of his ossuary, Charlie had taken some photographs, and he sent them to me in an email, and when I opened them up, I was just flabbergasted. I couldn't believe it was actually the hooked X with another symbol, the Tau cross, as a monogram. And I wrote that in my email, and I explained, I thought maybe this is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end of the hooked X, if it does represent the A sound or the Aleph symbol, and the Tau is the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet, the Aleph being the first, maybe it was symbolic of the Alpha and the Omega. And, of course, Jesus is known to have been associated with the Alpha and the Omega. So I wrote that, and I sent the email, and 5 other biblical scholars in Jerusalem were on that email thread, and he said every one of them agreed with me. So I was thrilled to death, and I have to say, if you had said, Scott, you can find the hooked X symbol anywhere you want on anything in history, any document associated with anybody or anything, I never would have picked the Jesus ossuary in Jerusalem. No. I never would have picked it. It was stunning. But, I do want to just tell you one other quick thing, and this was something that Jerry Lutkin, another one of the Telpia tomb researchers who happens to live in Minnesota, and he's a very good friend, shared with me here this past week. And that was, there was a scientific paper written by a geologist in Jerusalem. His name is Shimron. And basically, what he did is he collected sediment samples from various tombs in Jerusalem and some of the geochemical material that was preserved on the ossuaries that came from the Telpia tomb and many of these other tombs. He also tested a controversial ossuary that many people are still trying to figure out, and that is another ossuary that is carved with the name James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus, the controversial James ossuary. And a lot of people don't understand the controversy, but if we go back to 1980 when the tomb was first discovered, the archaeologists documented 10 ossuaries within the tomb. However, only 9 ossuaries made it back to the Israeli Antiquities Archives. One of the ossuaries went missing. And, of course, when that one showed up on the antiquities market several years later, many people speculated that could have been the missing 10th ossuary from the Telpia tomb. However, how would you ever prove it? Well, this paper that was just published, they tested the geochemical profile of the ossuaries that were preserved on the ossuaries and inside these various tombs. And guess what? The unique geochemical profile inside the Telpia tomb that was preserved on the other 9 ossuaries, when they tested the James ossuary, it matched the other ossuaries and the sediments that were collected from the Telpia tomb. So now, instead of having 6 ossuaries inscribed with names that are all part of the biblical family. Now we have a seventh, and it's the brother of Jesus, James. And what that does is it puts the odds into the millions to 1 against this being the tomb. Good luck on that one. And all I can say is I was convinced before. Now it's a done deal.
Well, I've contacted Charlie and asked if he would come on the show and talk about his book, The Jesus Family Tomb, and he's responded. I'm sure he's checking me out to make sure I'm not a crazy lady.
Well, tell him I said to come on the show that you would be good. I can tell him too.
Oh, that would help. That would help a lot.
Yeah, I correspond with him on a semi-regular basis. So yeah, I'd be happy to do that. We have a good time here, and I'll just tell him, hey man, any promotion is good promotion. So
That's true.
I'm sure he'll be happy to do it. He's a sharp guy. He's done an awful lot of work. He's also did a lot of scientific work on the Titanic. So he's got a lot of things that he could talk about. He's a great writer. He's written some really good books, and he's a good guy too.
Yeah, I thoroughly I ate his book up in a day and a half. So, but I'm lucky. I'm a fast, articulate reader. So it's a joy to be able to do this kind of research and then share it with other people.
Absolutely.
And for those that that your work took you all the way to Jerusalem, have you been there? Have you seen the tomb?
I have not seen. Well, I've been by the tomb. There's a concrete slab that covers it up right now, and let's just say access is extremely difficult. But to tell you the truth, what I'm more interested in looking at are the actual ossuaries. And I think I'm going to get a chance to do that at some point here in the next couple of years. But and really what I would like to do is I want to see this. Well, I have seen the hooked Textile cross with my own eyes. I did see it when it was on exhibition in Los Angeles, California here about 3-4 years ago. And, I can say I've seen it with my own eyes, but I would love to get it under my 3D microscope and do some works on those carvings and take a look at the side of the box where the Aramaic inscription of Jesus, son of Joseph, is inscribed. And there's a very interesting X symbol that is in front of the name. Aramaic is carved right to left as opposed to left to right. So at the front, on the right side, is a large X. And I remember, that's one of the things I was able to help Charlie Pellegrino and some of the other researchers with. They didn't know what that X was. And I told him, I said, the X is a symbol of an initiate, somebody who's been educated in the ancient mysteries. And sure enough, it turns out that some of the other X's that I didn't know who these people were, people like Caiaphas, were clergy and people that certainly would have been initiated to some degree in ancient knowledge through the initiation process. And so, that was helpful. And obviously Jesus was initiated, and there's that big X in front of his name on the box.
Yeah, I think somebody said somewhere in the book it stood for righteousness. Righteousness.
Well, that may be another word for initiated.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that what you've done here is make an amazing connection in my mind, to my mind, with the Knights Templars, to the Knights Templars, the Cistercians, the Knights Templars, and then Freemasonry. And it all flows so beautifully that it's phenomenal.
Does. And I'm really glad to hear you say that, because you know how it is when you get your own idea and you think it's a great idea, and somebody else goes, "What are you thinking, man? That's dumb." But in my mind, it flows together beautifully, and it does make sense. But it doesn't necessarily fit the historical narrative that we've been told. And but then so what? I mean, that's the way it's been with many things. And I really do believe that we're getting to the truth here. But one of the other things that's happening here is we're seeing that there are some historical truths that are inconvenient for some people and certain ideologies. So that in part explains why a lot of this has been rejected, and why it's been pushed into the shadows. And but it's coming into the light now, and it's long past time. And I personally believe that once we know more about what the truth really is about our past, I think it will help us going forward into the future. And it's not just a matter of learning lessons of the past, although that's certainly important. But I think there's bigger things that are going on here, and we just have to be honest about it. And I also believe that old saying, the truth will set you free, and freedom and intelligence is power, and that will just help people succeed. I mean, that's why the clergy for a long time kept people in the dark. They didn't want people to be educated. They didn't want people reading the Bible. They wanted to tell them what it said so that they could control them, and they would be subservient. And Freemasonry, that's not what it's about. And, can I tell you a quick story of something that happened just the other day, Barbara?
Sure.
That was really profound. I was actually doing another radio interview with somebody in Norway. He was in Norway, and we were having a great conversation. And while we were there, I just checked my email because I was technically working. And I got a note from the Scottish Rite, and they asked me if I would – somebody had gotten sick, and they asked me if I would help out with a degree. But because it was the 32nd degree, the last degree, it started at 4:30. When I picked up the message, it was 2 o'clock, and they said, "Can you help us?" I said, "Sure." So I asked them if we could reschedule the interview, which we're going to do it tomorrow. And they said, get here, be dressed and ready by 4:30. And then they gave me my script. So I had to memorize the script. And I actually pulled it off, but, I'm used to doing that. But I'm going to read to you what my script was. And it's so beautiful. And I think you'll understand the profoundness of what this is. But remember, this is the 32nd degree, and what they have is a principal candidate. They select one person from the class who's going through these degrees to actually be part of the degree, right? And he represents all the others that are sitting on the sidelines watching the degree. And I was the first tent. I was dressed up as a knight, and I had to deliver this message to the principal candidate. Okay, you ready?
Ready.
You are now in the 9th tent. Its symbolic letters are I and S. Its flag is blue. Here are said to be encamped the apprentices, fellow crafts, and master masons. The first degree showed you man, ignorant and helpless. As a fellow craft, you were taught the value of association and the necessity of the knowledge that makes men free. The third degree symbolized the people raised from the death of bondage and ignorance to a life of freedom and intelligence. And basically, those are the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry right there. It's about bringing somebody who's, who hasn't learned this knowledge, right, that we teach in Freemasonry. And really, it's a lesson for life, for all people, and for societies, that those that are strapped by the way it used to be with the church and the king having all the power and not educating their populace and keeping them subservient and basically in bondage and ignorant of facts. And then, when the Enlightenment period came and people started to read things that were published in the vernacular so people could understand it, and they learned, knowledge is power. And eventually they were able to overthrow the church and the crown and form this new nation that we call the United States of America, where we're supposed to have religious freedom. contrary to what some people believe. We are not a Roman Christian country. You can be any religion you want, and that's what we fought for. And it's not a monarchy either. And, Barbara, I have to say, and I don't want to get into politics, but we live in such a divisive time right now, and I think a lot of people, part of the reason they're so angry and upset is because they don't fully understand the way it's supposed to be. And Freemasons founded this country. They were also Knights Templar. And when we look back on what the principles were upon which this country was founded, freedom from the tyranny of monarchs, freedom of religion, freedom, period, to say and believe what you want. I think in some ways we've forgotten that. And this Constitution that we hear about every single day now, do people understand that is a Masonic document? That those are Masonic tenets? I don't think they do. I think they need to be reminded, and that's in part what I'm hoping to do with the work we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think to me, I've always, and those three tenets you were talking about constitute the Blue Lodge.
Right.
So I've often, the more I've looked into and talked to Masons, and my grandfather was a Mason, and researching it, to me, Masonry is the male form of a spiritual journey that women go on and talk about all over the place, while the men talk about it, and then they have to, I think in many ways, Masonry is more profound because, you talk about it, you memorize it, but then you have to live it in order to go forward.
100%. You hit the nail on the head. It's one thing to memorize these great speeches and these, wonderful words that people utter. It's another thing to embrace them and live them and walk the talk, right? And you said something interesting too about how women, are doing their spiritual journey, and men have to go through Masonry to get to that point. And I got to be honest with you, I hope I don't sound sexist when I say this, but I think you're right. But I can also tell you this: there's nothing that we do in Freemasonry that women can't handle. But I respect the tradition, and I'm not here to try to change it. But there's nothing you guys are missing out on in that respect. Because I think in many ways, you said it yourself, you're already down the track a lot farther than most of us guys, and we're just catching up to the ladies.
Well, I think that it's the fact that people laugh at a lot of the spiritual work that a lot of the females do, but I think Masonry has kind of kept it tighter, and in many ways you get more information. The spiritual groups that are out there today don't have the same foundation that you do, and I think that it's important that at some point in time, the sacred female and the male kind of reintegrate themselves so everybody has access to all of the material. And, we are coming into a time where the sacred female is coming out of the closet yet again. She's never been gone.
No. Look, I'll tell you this too, Barbara. The feminine is within Freemasonry. I see it everywhere. She just veiled. And actually, if we go back in time, we go back to the time of our founding fathers, she was actually more omnipresent within Freemasonry. But over the last 250 years, she's quite frankly been suppressed. But I can tell you, there was at the end of this particular degree. So the first half of the degree, I had to remember those lines I read to you. In the second part, I was given some quick lines literally on the spot, but it was easy to remember. I still remember what it was. And I just said to the candidate, 1 is 3 and 3 is 1. Creator, the profound wisdom, and the profound word. And that's all I said to him. And as soon as I read the profound wisdom, That's the sacred feminine. That's the goddess right there.
Yeah.
And it's just a different way of saying it, right? And the word, at the end of the day, I can't tell you what the actual word is, but it has to do with dualism and balance. And at the end of the day, in the final degree, which we teach the candidate is to learn to live in balance, that you're going to have opposing forces and you're going to have your highs and your lows, but you always want to try to achieve balance. Well, it may seem like a simple message, and it is a simple message. It's just not that easy to do and to live all the time. But at the end of the day, isn't that what life is all about, living in balance?
Oh. And, this is a truth that you go back to Newgrange in Ireland, and it's got the three swirls, the group of the three
triple spiral,
swirls.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's really, father, mother, and child. It's the Trinity in a different way, but it's the Trinity that has been around there for thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
It's been there forever. Come on. I mean, it's since humans have been procreating, it's been there. It just wasn't wasn't defined, I assume, but and you know what? That's one of the interpretations of the hooked X. Excuse me. If you take an X and chop it in half horizontally, the V represents the female, the peak represents the male. You combine them into an X, you have the allegorical union of male, female, heaven and earth, good, bad, light, dark, dualism. But then when you add the hook in the upper right arm, you create a small V, a child, a daughter inside the womb of its mother, right? The big V. And could that be the Holy Trinity, right? And I ask a lot of people in my lectures, I sort of set them up and I say, well, let me ask you a question. What is the Holy Trinity? Well, it's the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then I asked them, I said, what's the Holy Spirit? And they sort of look at me and they're kind of confused and they go, well, it's the Spirit in you. And they have all these different definitions. And I said, can we all agree that it's really not well defined? And they kind of nod their heads. And I say, well, let me tell you what I think it is. You got the Father, you got the child, who's missing? And suddenly it becomes obvious. That's the Holy Trinity.
Well, that's where I have been for quite a while, but, I've been alone for a while as far as I knew. I'm sure I'm not the only one that have
Can I come into the party?
Sure. No,
all right. Now we got a little party going here. But you know what, Barbara? I really do think that despite the difficulty that we have in the world today, I do think that we're making progress. And I can almost feel like the ship is slowing down and slowly starting to turn around. And the rise of the feminine, as was predicted, and if you believe in prophecy, this is the time of prophecy that says it is the time of the rise of the feminine. We just entered the age of Aquarius, right? The feminine water bearer, the symbol that is two rivers or two streams that flow together as one, right? I love that prophecy, and I think there's something to it. And I think we're going to see that happen. I'm optimistic that it will.
Oh, I totally agree. I think it's a very exciting time. No longer are they burning people at the stake or drowning them. Of course, they are shooting them. But
well, that's true. Like I said, we're not there yet, but I do think we're making progress. I really do.
Not totally. But I think one of the fascinating. I was so delighted to see that you brought the Cremona document into your book.
Yeah.
Because you want to kind of explain for those who don't know what it is.
Well, the Cremona document, oh boy, I'm going to be giving a lecture on this on Thursday when I'm out in Massachusetts, and it's really a complicated story from the standpoint of trying to understand how it came to be, how it came into the possession of Dr. Bill Jackson and now Don Rue, but essentially what it is it's a copy, and probably a copy of a copy of a copy of multiple documents. It's a compilation of documents, and the two main documents that are part of this are something called we just call it the We Six Have Now Entered Under the South Wall, and basically it's the story of the 6 Templar knights that went into Jerusalem and found their way under the Temple Mount. And I don't think they found their way. I think they knew exactly where they were going. I know they knew where they were going, and I know they knew what they were looking for. This was no accident. And they went down underneath into a tomb, and they found the treasure. Part of the treasure that is documented in this particular document were scrolls that talked about, and these are first century scrolls, that talked about additional first century scrolls that had been hidden back in the first century.
Oops, he's gone again.
Oh, am I gone?
Okay.
Am I still there?
No, you're back.
Okay, sorry.
Yep, you hiccuped, that's all.
Okay, but we're good, eh?
Yep, so far.
Okay. Anyway, this document talks about other first century documents that had been hidden in a land called Ontiora. And Ontiora is North America. And those documents were then taken back to, well, according to the records we have, to Bernard de Clairvaux. And they were deciphered and translated. And then 6 decades later, in 1177-78, a Templar knight by the name of Ralph de Sutherly went with 6 knights and 140 men and women on a voyage to the land of Ontiora, led by a woman that they were able to get from the Danish court to lead them back to Hunter Mountain, to the Temple of the Goddess in the Catskill Mountains, to recover those scrolls that had been hidden in the first century. And he did that. Unfortunately, he did not recover all of the scrolls. He recovered some of the scrolls and took them back. And in 1180, his deposition was taken, and the story of his mission going to the land of Ontiora is the deposition that was taken in Seborga, Italy, in 1180 when he returned in the presence of the Grand Master Odin. So it's just an amazing story. And so what I've been doing for the last 13 years, in part with Zena Halpern and Don Rue and some other people, is vet this story. Now, one of the things I think it's important for people to know, and you brought up Zena's book. Unfortunately, Zena did not get everything right in her book. She was not aware that the code that was in a different document that she deciphered in the first quarter of her book, that code was made up. And the reason it was made up by Bill Jackson. And it's kind of a long story, but essentially what happened was when he followed the story of the Cremona document up to Hunter Mountain and they found Altamara's tomb, the problem that he had when he was trying to get the document deciphered is he was dealing with some pretty unethical and nasty scholars. He ran into the same type of pushback that I've run into and many other people pursuing these truths have run into, and including a guy by the name of Barry Fell, and you can read about that in the book. Barry Fell deserves a lot of credit for his book, America BC, and being one of the few scholars, a Harvard scholar, to come out and say that there were multiple cultures that came over to North America prior to Columbus, and this was back in 1976. The problem with Barry Fell is he overreached in many cases, and in some cases I think he just made it up, and unfortunately that takes away from a lot of the good work that he did, amazing work that he did, but he's human like the rest of us. But what happened to Bill Jackson is he became disillusioned by the behavior of these scholars, and he was originally going to write the Cremona document story himself, and then he decided, I'm going to write a novel. And as part of that novel, he made up this code. But Zena was not aware of that. So that is just complete fiction. The other part that's fiction is the end of the book where she tries to tie the Oak Island to the Cremona document. There is no connection to Oak Island. She did that to engage the brothers on the show, and she was successful. But that was a red herring. So, but the Cremona document part and her interpretation of it, that part of the book is excellent.
Well, what I found just exciting was that in the Cremona document it gives landmarks and things like that on Hunter Mountain, and you and I think David Brody were able to locate some of these places.
Yes, we did, and the carvings that are on the mountain, and I wanted to look at them and get a sense of the weathering, and does it look like it could be consistent with that time frame? And in my mind, everything does match up. And the other thing was we found a carved stone up there ourselves using another document that came out of the tomb of Altamara. And in my book, I try to tie up all of the loose ends, and I think I do. And I think that story is amazing. And that stuff, Zena was certainly aware of the in-camera stone that we found with the latitude and longitude, but she was not aware of the letter that came forward from Bill Jackson's daughter that really tied all the loose ends together for us. And, of course, now the big question is, where are those documents now that were recovered from Hunter Mountain? That's the next mystery we're trying to solve.
Well, it's a good mystery, but to be
able
to take
the gift that keeps giving.
well, and the story, I've read it in several different places, and it to me it's spellbinding when you consider that this is what, the 14th century, or is this the 1100s? I mean,
well, the Cremona document story takes place in the 12th century. However, there were other people that were up on the mountain before we were, and most notably, the letter that was written was written by a man by the name of Lionel de Waldern, the 21st. One of the 6 knights that came over with Ralph de Sutherland back in the 12th century was a man by the name of Lionel de Waldern. This was his descendant 21 generations later, and he was up on the mountain almost 500 years after his ancestor was. And
wow.
It's nothing short of incredible. And in that letter, he tells us exactly what documents he got, and that they were taken up to Montreal. And, of course, at that time, when he wrote this letter in 1656, they had just established the first Sulpician seminary, and the Sulpicians picked up the mantle and the torch, if you will, of the Cistercians. So they were on the same squad, if you will, and that's where those things were probably taken and hidden. Now, that was back in 1656, right?
Yeah.
It's been 350 years, or what is that? That'd be, 350 years since. The question is, where are those documents now?
Well, when the scrolls were taken back to Europe and given to the Pope, were they all given to the Pope?
No, they were not given to the Pope. They were given to the Grand Master of the Knights Templar Order he was the Grand Master for all of the Knights Templar at that time. So they did not go back to the Pope. And this was, a lot of people think that the Templars were working, they were the military arm of the church. Well, they were. But you know that old phrase, keep your friends close, your enemies closer?
Yes.
That's basically what they were doing. And the Cistercian order and the Templars that they were part of, basically what I say to people is when Bernard de Clairvaux joined the Cistercian order in 1113 with 30 of his family members, and remember, this is at the exact time that those Templars went under the Temple Mount and found these documents. In my mind, that was the greatest coup d'etat in history that nobody knows anything about. They don't understand what it really was. And I think there were people even at the time that understood what it was, but the church was never going to admit that they were being duped by these, what I call Venus families.
Away again.
Yeah.
Okay,
Hello?
You're back.
Oh, I think maybe I just had the phone too close to my my mouth here. I'll back it up a little bit. But in any case, yeah, it's an incredible story from start to finish. It's got so many wonderful chapters, and to be quite frank with you, this is the story. This is the series I would love to do on television. I've had a wonderful time doing American Unearthed. My God, we've done 49 episodes, almost 50 episodes, and it's done well, and I'm very proud of it. But you know what? I would trade it all if I could do a series that focused simply on this story, because I think it's the greatest story out there. There's so much information that has not been shared yet, and I think people would love it. I mean, my God, if they love National Treasure, this is National Treasure on steroids, and it's true.
Oh, I mean, there's love stories in here too.
Absolutely. I mean, the story of Altamara and Leon the Spaniard. I mean, he married her in the Danish court. The Grand Master, the king, who was a Templar, said someone's got to marry her before she can go. And when you read the story, it sounds like it was a real love story.
Well, and he, there were so many places here that they bring in things that unless you know about some of the other stuff you don't recognize. For instance, the copper plates and stuff they had that came from the copper mines in Minnesota and Michigan.
Well, that's right. And, this has been a discussion item that I've been having with people like David Brody and others, that are obviously open-minded. He's done a lot of wonderful research himself, presented it in his novels. But, people will go a long way to get valuable things, right? And in many cases, these are sacred journeys, and these articles that they're collecting, like copper and gold and other valuables, are sacred items. And in our world today, we don't look at these things in the same way. I mean, it's just part of our sustenance. It's like, well, we got to have food. I can get food at the store, and I can go to a restaurant or Wendy's or Arby's or whatever, and we don't have to work as hard as people used to get the things that would sustain themselves, right? And life was a hell of a lot harder, and our lifespans were shorter, and our mentality was different. And we just don't understand and appreciate things today the way people did in the past. And that context is really, really important. And once you sort of think about how other people thought and you start to get into their minds, it really helps you, I think, understand what they might do and why we see these things that we see. I mean, for example, look at the copper in the UP of Michigan. I mean, it's one thing to go to a copper mine and mine it and then smelt it out of the rock. But up there's float copper literally after the glaciers melted away, just laying around everywhere. And it was 99.9% pure copper, and you could just pick it up off the ground. I mean, you talk about a sacred item. There's a reason why they traveled, so far across the world. What they were going for was worth it.
Well, the history books today, and as a retired school teacher, I'm so offended by what the history books today are showing. I mean, there was an amazing traffic thousands of years ago for the copper that was in the Upper Peninsula there, and it sort of makes you wonder, who are these people writing the history books today that they don't know about all of this stuff? I mean, they know about it,
Well,
but
you got to remember something. Tenure is very important, and if you don't have tenure, or if you're somebody who has put forth an idea or a theory, and you become famous for it, and then all of a sudden something comes along that basically renders all the work you did irrelevant or useless or worthless, people aren't going to take that laying down, are they? They're going to fight hard to protect their own legacies and the work that they've done. Now, a lot of these scholars that I'm talking about are working in the humanities disciplines, and I don't mean to criticize these disciplines by saying that they're not worthy of study or anything like that. But my point is that these are not hard science disciplines. These people are not formally trained in proper scientific method, and quite frankly, it shows. And what I find laughable is some of these scholars, such as Henrik Williams, is trying to tell me that the only way to solve the Kensington Rune Stone is through the scientific method of runology. Scientific? Are you kidding me? I mean, this whole art, this thing of runology is as much of an art as anything I've ever seen. But yet, he's telling me, a hard scientist who runs a forensic lab, that, my discipline doesn't matter. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that happens in academia, and it's borderline unbelievable in some cases. But if they were truly scientific, let's say, Barbara, you wrote a paper about something, and some student of yours came along and used new technology. You mentioned it before, or found documents that had never been seen before, like the Cremona document, and brought them to your attention, and they directly refuted something that you had published years ago. It was new information that you didn't have access to. What would be your reaction? I can tell you what your reaction should be. It should be, you know what, that's awesome. New evidence that comes in and dictates a new conclusion, that's called science. That's the way it works. And because it changes your theory, it doesn't make you stupid. It doesn't make you wrong. It makes you smart when you accept the fact that new evidence comes in and has gotten to a better truth. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I think.
Yeah, but you know what? To you and I, that's obvious. It's not to many academics, and it's sad, is what it is.
Well, I think another sadness, unfortunately, is that lots of times when people are out of school, they figure, okay, I'm done. I don't have to learn anymore. And the reality is that's when you start learning. That's when you start following, your own inclinations as to what is fascinating and what will give me a greater perspective on reality and make my life better and richer. So that I think that what you're doing especially is so. I mean, how many people have even heard of the Cremona document? I mean, it's
right.
It's definitely, but it is one of the best stories ever. I mean, it is. It floors you, and the fact that when he got back, he was rewarded by being given the governorship of Petra.
Right, and the opportunity to collect some other treasures. So, I mean, what he did, back then was an extremely dangerous mission, and they lost some men. They lost Altamara. She didn't make it. So yeah, I think he was fairly rewarded. But again, he was doing God's work. He was doing the Grand Master's work. He was doing the work for the order, and he was a dedicated Templar. And nobody knows who he is. But they are going to know who he is. But I will tell you this: as great as the Cremona document story is, and it's a fantastic story, no question about it. I'm working on a book right now about 2 additional sets of documents that trump the Cremona document. Pardon the pun, but it's a better story than that, but it directly connects with the Cremona document, but it's later in history. It's more recent in our history. And it's not just one set of documents. It's 2 different sets, and they are going to just blow the lid off of this story. They are going to put the final nails in this story, in the coffin of this story. They're going to end all this crazy stuff that we've been taught for a long time. The truth about the Templars and the founding of this nation is going to be well understood, better understood than you can imagine. Let me just tease you with one little thing.
Okay.
And I'm in the process of vetting these I've been vetting these documents now for 4 years. But they are so detailed that I can tell you the name of the monk who carved the Kensington Rune Stone.
Well, that's definitely something.
That's pretty detailed, isn't it?
I would say so.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's not even the tip of the iceberg. So stay tuned for that.
Well, part of the, there is more teasing here in your book too that I don't want to ignore, because I find it fascinating and exciting, and it all goes back to the journey of these Knights Templar, and of course the treasure that they are preserving. Now, in my mind, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest treasure that the Templars may have found is knowledge and wisdom. Forget the gold, silver, and gemstones and everything, but of course that's what everybody's looking for. But,
well, yeah, and make no mistake, if we found a treasure chest full of gold, silver, and jewels, I'd be excited. But you're right. You know, the true treasure is not precious gold and silver. You can't take that with you. It is knowledge, and it's enlightenment. I mean, that's what it's all about. You also said it before. It's a lifelong thing. You never stop learning, and you'll never learn everything. And those people that don't learn, in my mind, they're just existing. And and in the end, I don't think that's a very fulfilling way to live a life.
No, but let me just, the treasure in quote marks was brought to this country at a very early time, and those that brought it intermarried into the indigenous peoples that were here, and that at some particular point in time, because I guess society or humanity was encroaching upon what they considered wilderness, they took and moved the treasure, and then as the same thing happened again and again, it has been moved a number of times, and it was out west, and the theory is that it has now been moved to another place.
Right.
And what I find fascinating is part of the story has to do with the Lewis and Clark expedition and Thomas Jefferson.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
And the murder
and the Louisiana
of
Purchase.
Yes. so that sooner or later they were going to hit an ocean and have to find another place to put it. So.
Yep, they could only go so far, and then they ran out of territory. But you know something, Barbara, that is the story that you're talking about that's in my book, and it's true. That a big part of, all of that I talk about in the book is true. But I will tell you also, with these new documents, the story is much more complicated, and actually makes a lot more sense, because one of the things that I will tell you is that the Templars would never put all their eggs in one basket, and that is why I find the Oak Island show to be just ridiculous. like first of all, that I can tell you for sure that there's nothing there, and although there was stuff all around it. And that the treasure, and there was multiple treasures that were brought over. It wasn't just one great big push. They brought everything over, and that was it. There were waves of treasures that were brought over, and they were put in many places because, like I said, they would never put all their eggs in one basket. And everybody seems to think that it's on Oak Island. It's not on Oak Island. Oak Island was a decoy site. And it's worked perfectly right to this day. And the other thing is many of those treasures were recovered, and they were used in part to found this nation. And that was some of the information that comes from these documents that we're vetting right now. In fact, we pitched it to to the networks, and they didn't want it at the time. But funny, this is the story that they're using on that Oak Island show, and they got it from us. But they just don't. But unfortunately, they don't know the story. But they will. And
well, I can understand.
We'll see where it ends up.
I can understand part of whatever it was being used to finance the American Revolution. I can see that in a heartbeat.
Well, that's what happened. That's in part what happened.
Oh,
that's exactly what happened.
But I think what fascinated me was Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark to find a passage to obviously the Pacific, but Meriwether Lewis had other tasks that he was to perform, and I think partially too, he was, to my mind, he was to look for Welsh-speaking people, because if there were Welsh-speaking people out there, according to the papal bulls that were set forward for those who were going to discover lost continents, was that they could claim them only if there were no Christians there. And so was Jefferson sending Meriwether Lewis out to find Templar stuff because he was a Templar, or was he?
Oh, of course he was, and he found it. When he wintered over with the Mandan, that first winter in 1803, that's where they met Sacagawea. The information that we have gotten from certain indigenous sources is she's a descendant of a Templar.
Wow.
Therefore, her brother, who was chief of the Shoshone, was also a descendant, right? And she had been kidnapped by the Hidatsa when she was a young girl, and it ended up with the Mandan. And then, I don't think it's a coincidence that they just happened to meet up with her and her husband, Jean-Baptiste, and then, she leads them to the Shoshone, the horse people, which history will tell us, and is true, that they needed the horses to get all the way to the west. And that's absolutely true, and her knowledge of how to survive in the winter also helped them. But, he wanted to meet, Lewis wanted to meet the chief of the Blackfoot. And it just so happens at that time, the Blackfoot, that was their territory. It was probably a different tribe's territory prior to that, because the Blackfoot had migrated from up in Canada, but there were guardians of this vault, and they had made a promise to their Templar brethren, who, when I went through a midday wind sweat, I was told about their blood brothers. The indigenous people know all about them, and they know all about the story, and I'm sure there's many that have Templar blood running through their veins. In fact, some people have suggested, and I completely agree with it, is when the Templars came over, they carried the bloodline in their veins, and they intentionally brought it to North America and put it in the indigenous people to protect it.
Well, that makes perfect sense. And in Bill Mann's book, he talks about how the initiatory rites for the native peoples, the first people, are very similar to the initiatory rites of the Freemasons.
They're not similar. They're the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, they're the same. So, yes, and when the Templars came over, that is one of the things that they had in common. They literally bonded by blood. They had this common ideology. And part of that ideology is something I've written about for a long time that I figured out through Bernard, was they shared and embraced the same reverence for the great goddess or the sacred feminine. And the Templars just had to keep it hidden. And that was one of the things that the church, that was part of the heresies that they were guilty of. But they venerated the Virgin Mary like the church wanted them to. They just looked at her in a different way. She was a different Mary. So it's a fascinating story, and I think it's all coming full circle. But more important than anything, Barbara, is that it all fits together as it must if it's true. And so far, it's fitting together like a glove.
Well, I just the more I follow all of this material, the more convinced I am that there is a, everybody says, oh, there's a revolution coming, and I think there is, but I don't think it's the kind of revolution they expect.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that's absolutely true that's happening right now. Young people are not finding the answers to the big questions in life in church anymore like they used to. They're looking in other places. They're all still asking those same questions. They're just they're finding the answers in different places. And one of the things that I would implore certainly young men to do, and not so young men, is to look into Freemasonry. Spirituality is something that you can pursue and learn and grow and flourish your own spiritual self. You don't need to have a church to do it. If you want to go through church, you certainly can, but there are other ways to do that. And some people choose to do that on their own, to have a relationship with deity, whatever God you want to venerate, whatever you want to call it. You can have that relationship all by yourself, one-to-one. You don't need a conduit to get there. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize that. And it can be a really profound thing. And that's changing. And, you remember, Barbara, you've heard this, you hear your parents and your grandparents talk about, well, the younger generation, they're not as smart. They're not as good as it, we had it tougher when we were young and all that BS, right? You know what? I think the young people today are smarter than we were, quite frankly. They're certainly more technologically savvy. And, look, they're born with the same potential and same intelligence. And many of them are so impressive and doing such good work. I think the future is bright. And it's up to coach them, right? To coach them up and make sure that they're doing things the right way, that they're learning right. But I think the future is solid with the generations that's coming up. And, people just have to work together, and we'll get through this thing.
Oh, I'm sure we will definitely survive this. There's no doubt in my mind as to that. I just feel that there is an element of wisdom. I think the sacred feminine is coming more out into the open, where people are more comfortable with it. When I used to do lots and lots and lots of meditations, it always started out with Father, Mother, God, so that there's this sense of finding balance first within oneself and then applying it to your life, and that balance has to come with the yin and the yang, the positive, negative, the male and the female. And when you go back to the Cremora papers and a lot of this other material, you're finding indigenous peoples thousands of years ago had that balance, understood that balance, understood the worship of nature and the fact that there were spirits in everything. I mean, they had a better cosmology sometimes than we do today, and people are going away from organized dogma into a more spiritual philosophy as to their personal connection with a creator. And I think that's great.
I agree. I think that's definitely happening, and it's a good thing. I think we need it.
Oh, goodness, yes. So with all of this, the travels of the treasure, and I'm not going to, they're going to have to read your book to figure out where you think it may have been put.
Yep.
But what happens to, and you do give a place. I mean, you don't dig it up and say, "Aha, the treasure," but you.
Oh, I
you
don't
give,
think anybody's going to be digging it up, even if they wanted to. That's not going to happen.
Well, there's so much new stuff coming into public domain these days that it's so exciting to be able to start to put pieces together. And you know what's fascinating is between the Narragansett stone,
Narragansett Rune Stone.
Yeah, between that and the
In-Hock Stone.
Yes,
there's
yeah, I mean, and you know, all of these sites that you've talked about so often that you know, there's a connection. There's a connection that is so obvious. There's a geographic connection too. It's kind of like it was already computed. There is the cryptic code that does talk about all of this. So
right.
How could people not recognize that it's there?
Well, you know, I mean, I think what's most important when you talk about the treasure that was brought back and put in a certain place, I think it has more to do with some of the sacred relics. And I don't want to tip off people too much. I want them to read the book, but you know, a lot of that stuff, it's not like it's currency that you can go out and spend, right? These artifacts are very sacred. They're very important, and they have to be housed, and they have to be kept secret. Just knowing that they are being kept and that they're safe, I think, is important. And my hope is someday in the future, those relics and artifacts will be made public, and we'll be able to see them. But the evidence of where they are is, to use a Masonic phrase, hidden in plain sight. You just have to know what to look for, right? And once you have the keys, all of a sudden it's right in front of you. It was there all the time.
Well, it's the Kensington Rune Stone that kind of got you into the cryptic code, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, it started this whole journey, and when I finally took that specific degree, and I heard those magic numbers, 8 and 22. I don't know how many people that have gone through that degree or will go through that degree that knows the inscription on the runestone as well as I do, that would pick out those numbers and say, hey, wait a minute, that can't be a coincidence. And it turns out it was not a coincidence, and it was only the beginning. I will never forget that day, and I can remember it like it happened yesterday. It wasn't that long ago. It was about three and a half years ago, but it seemed like it was yesterday.
Well, you know, a lot of your shows have centered on the Newport Tower and the Kensington Rune Stone and the Narragansett Stone. I mean, and, you know, living in the Northeast, you know, it to me is so awe-inspiring that these artifacts are here, and certainly I live in the middle of the Stone Chamber territory here in Connecticut,
right.
So that, you know, it's sort of like you live in the middle of history and you don't even recognize it, and that is for me such a sad comment on today's society.
Well, let's face it, this stuff isn't for everybody, right? And that's part of what makes the world go round and makes it interesting, is everybody has different things that they're into. And I mean, I got to be honest, I find it sad that more people aren't into this. I wish everybody was into it, but you know, it's not everybody's cup of tea. But I do think that this research and these truths and these artifacts and the history that they represent, there are parts of it and pieces of it, at least, that everybody should take an interest in, or that will interest everybody, because it's going to affect us all in the long run, one way or another. And I think everybody should know these things. I think they're fascinating. I think movies like National Treasure, the popularity of something like that, a fictional story that has actually a lot more truth in it than I even realized until recently. But there are a lot of people that like this. I think they just need to be exposed to it and look into it. And I don't know. I think more people will get into it. I'm confident that'll happen.
Well, when you look at first of all, you look at the stones and the tower and everything else, and then you get into the cryptic code, and then you're on a journey with Knights Templar and Freemasons, Knights Templar, Cistercian monks, and then you end up at the tomb of Jesus' family. I mean, there has to be something in there to fascinate everybody.
I think so.
I what else could there be? Maybe flying saucers, but we don't even need them. I mean,
well, you know what? But they may enter the story at some point, so just put that on hold for now.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me, but I think there's so much. I mean, history is important, because if you don't understand where you've come from, you don't have any foundation to go somewhere.
Right.
You have to have that foundation, and the story is not a dull story. It's a fascinating story, and when you go to the forensic part of it, especially with the material that they found in the Talpot tombs, they got down to cloth and weaving stuff and bone fragments from 2,000 years ago.
Yep.
And they were able to DNA test them. So this is a part of our history. This is a part of our creational stuff. This is where we came from. And to not agree. To not dig into it. I'm not saying you have to make it your life study, but know about it. And there are lots of things that I've read that while I think, well, that's a great story, I'm not sure I can put it into my perspective of life at this moment in time, but I'm going to put it back and take a look at it. And I have to admit, when I read Zena Halpern's book the first time, I thought, my God, she's got an amazing imagination. And then the more I researched it, the more I realized, wait a minute, this is an imagination, because you can check out so much of this stuff. It has to have a validity of some sort. And the further I went in checking out in different areas in from different people, it came into a greater focus. It's like, by gosh, this is not as much of a flight of fancy as it is. These are facts. You can check them out.
Well, you have to, in my mind, you have to find as many facts and treat your investigations, when possible, as scientifically as you can. I mean, some of this stuff you have to make some leaps and see if you can find the evidence to support it. And it turns out we've been able to do that. But any time and every time that you can gather facts to support your thesis, it's critical. And so I remind people that I work with all the time, do you have facts to support what you're saying? And have you tested those facts? And in many cases, you have to test it. I'll give you an example. Janet, my wife Janet, and Alan Butler wrote a book together, and one of the things that they proposed was that the Washington Monument is a giant sundial, and that it points to certain places and certain things on certain days and times of the year. And, Alan was using computer models, and he was getting these amazing alignments. And I said to both of them, I said, hey, guys, I said, this is fantastic stuff. But what you need to do is you have to test it. So we actually went out there on those days when these things were supposed to have occurred, and we tested the theory. And I'll be damned, they checked out. So whenever possible, as great as an idea is, or as convinced as you are that it's right, if there's a way that you can test it, you have to do it. just if for no other reason than for peace of mind, right?
Oh yeah, and you know, their book is by the way a very good book.
Oh yeah, no, they're that one, America, Nation of the Goddess. That's pretty good stuff too. But everything that Alan touches, you know, in my mind, turns to intellectual gold. Obviously, Jen did a great job, and I think they're working on another one right now. I don't want to tip off anything right now, but Alan Butler was the one who really opened my eyes to the true ideology of the Templars, and I'll be forever grateful for that. He's just an amazing guy. He's so knowledgeable, and you should have him on sometime.
I have.
Oh yeah, that's right. You have. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. We
well,
did her.
Don't tell them that I told you that they're working on another book.
No, I'll just keep closer track of it all. Yeah, no, that interview I did with the both of them was really amazing and opened my eyes to a lot of things that I hadn't known. I mean, I knew the Templars had part of the set out or the geographic locations of things in Washington D.C. and I hadn't realized that it was as great as I have looked at over time. That they had a heavier hand in the whole thing than I totally realized, and the Washington Monument and what it points out is really quite profound. And it had to be Masons that were able to, in many ways, calculating where the shadow was going to fall at certain time frames, because even down to events in World War II.
Right.
It points to them, and it amazed me, and it made it so much more of a spiritual experience, understanding that behind the scenes the Freemasons are still in there, helping to arrange things so that there is meaning, so that there is a pattern, so that there is a code, if you will. I mean, even down to bringing some of the big statues from England, the obelisks, over to this country and placing them in Manhattan.
Right.
I mean, they had to take apart parts of a ship to bring one of those over.
Yeah.
So that it was, you know, that at work at this moment in time, even when some things seem crazy, I'm sure there are Freemasons in there still making sure that things are placed in the right place and making sure that they are leaving coded places for people in the future to find if it's not time to bring them into our reality. I know that it's not the Blue Lodge guys, but it's the higher ups that are very aware of what's going on and how to place things and how to, and it's a generational thing. It's happened over. I know Freemasonry is not that old, but the Templars certainly are, and the Cistercians before them.
Look,
okay.
the craft, you know, officially came out, if you will, came out of the closet in 1717 when four lodges came together to form a Grand Lodge and make this announcement. But the fact that there were four lodges that existed before that tells you that the craft has been around for a long time. Indeed, it's been around for thousands of years. It has morphed and changed over the years, but the whole experience of ritual, of initiation is timeless. It's been around since humans have existed. It wasn't created in 1717. That I can assure you.
Well, I didn't think it had been.
No, I know you weren't saying that, but I'm just making sure that the audience knows. Okay,
but what is so fascinating is that there is a long-term project that has been underway for thousands of years.
Right.
And every generation is aware that this is going to be something that is ongoing, that we continue to explore and to expand, but it, you know, when it's time, you know, when the time is right, it will be brought forward, but not until that time. And it is fascinating that there is an organization like that out there that is spiritually based and has not gone the way of a lot of other religious organizations that have become corporations more than anything else. But spirituality, the spirituality has been maintained, and there is a higher purpose that is being solved here, that is being followed here, and it interweaves through all aspects of society and all religious beliefs. And you can be an atheist and still belong to Freemasons. You have to.
You don't really. You don't want to say that, though. That's frowned upon, because I think one of the things about initiation is, to really become enlightened, you have to be humbled, in a important way, and part of that is realizing that there are things that are greater than yourself, right?
Right. Well, then you have to admit to a higher being.
Right. So if you're an atheist and you don't believe that, it doesn't work as well.
No, that's true. But you do adhere to a higher being. It doesn't have to be in a particular religion.
Well, there's a reason why we call deity in Freemasonry the great architect of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be interpreted in a number of different ways, but the statement in a belief in a higher power is pretty important. Otherwise, the experience it won't work the same.
Well, then there's no place for spirituality to go. That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. But it has served a purpose for so long and continues to. And I think that people should be aware of it. I'm delighted that there is a female part of it.
We do have Eastern Star for women that is a sanctioned body within Freemasonry, and they have their own rituals and traditions that are pretty cool, and that works for a lot of women too. So there are other ways that women can have a similar experience. But at the end of the day, like you said before, in the very beginning of our conversation, I think women are, in general, farther along in the spiritual track than most guys. So,
you
guys are doing okay.
Yeah, I don't think we're in any way we're equal. Is basically what it comes down to. Before we run out of time, and we're close. I do want to first of all wish you a happy birthday on the 21st.
Oh, thank you. Something. When I was a kid, I never liked my birthday because everybody would come and say, "Well, here I got a gift for both your birthday and Christmas, right?" And it's like, oh God, But and I never really liked it. But I have to say, now that time has gone on, and I realize the significance of something like the winter solstice and some of the amazing things that happen on that day, I feel really fortunate, and I love my birthday now. I just love having it on such a important day when the sun is reborn, right? And
oh yeah.
It's a symbol of resurrection. It's all kinds of cool things, and so I've done a 180 on it. I love it now.
Are you going to be doing America's Stonehenge on the 21st again?
No, but I'll be at the Newport Tower on the 21st that morning, and it's supposed to be clear. The weather's supposed to be clear. We're going to be going up to America's Stonehenge on Thursday during the day, and then I have my lecture that night. And then we head down to Newport the next day, and my son's going with me, and we're going to have a really good time. I'm looking forward to that. So, one more day, and then it's fun time.
Well, I love America's Stonehenge. I think that it's an amazing place to go. And with the reforestation and everything that's going on up there, it's even more so. So it's definitely someplace people want to check out, as well as the Newport Tower.
Oh, absolutely. And there's all kinds of things on the East Coast, as you mentioned. And there's a lot of hidden history there. And I think, even though I think we've made a lot of really good progress, and it hasn't all just been me. I've worked with a lot of really smart people who have shared their knowledge and consulted with me, and working together, we have collectively really, I think, pushed the ball down the field a significant way. But I'll also say that there's a lot more work to do, and in many ways we're really just scratching the surface of the mysteries that are on this continent.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the really cool thing is that, you always, no matter when you think you have found it all, the reality is there's still so much more to go.
It's like a Russian doll, right? You take it out, another one inside, and then there's another one, and there's another one, and it just keeps going. That's exactly what's going on.
Well, also your books, all of them, and Janet's book, are on Amazon. You want to give out your website too to make sure we get that?
Yeah,
in?
you can certainly get it on Amazon. But if you would like a signed copy, we signed all books that are bought off the website. It's www.hookedx.com, HOOKEDX.com. And if you want it signed for somebody else, like for a birthday present or Christmas, just there's a little place to write a note or pop me an email. But it's worked out really good. We've sold lots of books, and so far people seem to enjoy it, and I'm happy about that.
Well, I think it's so far the best one you've written. I really do.
I think so too. I agree with you, but I'm hoping the one I'm working on now will be even better. I can tell you, the story is so good. It's up to me not to screw it up.
Well, as somebody who's kind of in the field, I can tell you that immediately it was recognizable that there had been a shift in your perspective. And
well, there has, and it was because I became a Mason, and it, one of the things that we say when people say, "What is Freemasonry?" Well, it's about making good men better men. I like to think that I've bettered myself by becoming a Mason, and it certainly has given me a different perspective, and not only have I learned a lot more, and I think we've made some important discoveries, but I've learned a lot more about myself, and I've grown myself as a human being, and that's important.
I know that my mother used to ask my grandfather about the Freemasonry and all of the material and everything, and he would just smile and wink at her, and it frustrated the daylights out of her. And certainly later on, when I was investigating Freemasonry, because family lore was that he had been a certain degree Mason, and I did my best to figure it all out. I did find he was in 2 different Blue Lodges, though, which was kind of fun. But
you can affiliate with other lodges. I do. I'm a member of more than one lodge. Blue Lodge.
Well, I think that the fun part was one of the lodges honored him at one time for his 50 years of service to the lodge. And when I spoke to the Grand Master at the temple, the big temple for New York, I said, I find this so hard to believe, because it's right here in your document you sent me that they handed out that he was honored for 50 years of faithful service. I said, for most of those years he was dead, and I'm pretty sure my grandmother wasn't paying the dues. So he said, well, that is rather strange, isn't it? And I said, yeah. They still haven't gotten back to me to explain it, which was, it was nice they honored him, but
yeah.
I'm not sure how he served. Must have been on the other side. But
yeah, I don't know how that one would work, but I'll let New York's Grand Lodge take care of that.
Yeah. Are you going to be any place next in the next couple of weeks that people can check you out at?
Well, I'm going to be, like I say, I'll be out in at the John Robinson Lodge in Lexington, Massachusetts, this Thursday. I have another lecture coming up. Well, I'm going to be doing something that's Masonic related, January 11th here locally. That has to do with, it'll have to do with the Rune Stone and a lot of this research. The craft is really starting to embrace this history that really is the craft's history. And I think that enough Masons are starting to see that the evidence supports the fact that this Templar history is also our history, and they should embrace it. And so I'm excited about that. We've got some plans for the next couple of years of some really exciting things coming up. And then I have another lecture here locally at, I think, the VFW in Chanhassen. I'm going to be seeing a bunch of my classmates from high school there, and other people will show up for that one. And then I have a big event in California on February 6th through the 9th at LAX Airport. It's called the Conscience Life Expo, and I'll be one of the speakers there, and I'll be on a panel for a panel discussion there, and that should be exciting. So, people, if they're out in California or they want to go out there, they should check it out. That should be a lot of fun.
Okay, well, we're right down to the line. I want to thank you again, and also I will be on the lookout for your next book.
Okay. Well, Barbara, thank you so much. I will let you know when we get close on that one. I think this one will come pretty quick because it's flowing out of me pretty fast, and it'll dovetail very nicely with the cryptic code. They'll be like bookends. So stay tuned for that.
I will definitely stay tuned. Want to thank everybody for listening, and I so appreciate all of your time and your energy, and we look forward to getting Scott back again real soon. Thank you for listening, everybody, and do check out the book and check out the website and check out our YouTube channel. And if you enjoy what you're listening to, please, please, please subscribe. Thanks a lot and good night.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.